For more of this kind of content you can subscribe to the channel, like the video and leave a comment. Dennis groaned as he pushed against the debris, pinning him down, his muscles screaming in protest. The war between humans and the alien Galari had torn through the skies, and now he was stranded alone, or so he thought. A rustling in the wreckage made him freeze. Instinct kicked in. He reached for his sidearm, gone. His fingers brushed over shattered metal. Useless. Then he saw her commander. Dennis recognized her instantly. He'd seen the battle reports, the warnings. She was a name that made soldiers tense up in their boots. A warrior, a killer, a woman whose name was whispered among war councils like a curse, and now she was standing here alive, breathing. She wiped blood from her lip and exhaled. You survived. Dennis pushed himself upright, keeping his stance steady. Disappointed, she scoffed, rolling her shoulders. Not yet. His fists clenched. The war was supposed to determine the victors, the survivors, yet here they were, two enemies trapped in the same hellhole. A deep, distant growl rumbled through the jungle. Val's head snapped toward the sound, her expression shifting from scrutiny to calculation. Where's your weapon? She asked. He smirked. If I had one, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Her eyes flicked to the broken firearm at his feet, then back to him. Before he could react, she had crossed the distance between them and kicked the broken gun deeper into the wreckage. Dennis tensed. What the hell was that? For she tilted her head, watching him. Oh, unarmed. I'm unarmed now. We're even. Dennis narrowed his eyes. Even we're not on the same damn side. Val lifted a brow. No, but unless you have a way off this rock, your side isn't coming for you either. The weight of her words settled in. No backup, no extraction, no allies, just the two of them. Another distant growl echoed, this time closer. Vala didn't hesitate. We need to move. Dennis stayed where he was. And go where? She stepped toward him. Somewhere that doesn't make us an easy kill. A beat of silence passed between them. Dennis exhaled sharply, dragging a hand through his dirt-streaked hair. He didn't trust her. She sure as hell didn't trust him, but for now he needed her. Fine, he muttered. Lead the way. Vala smiled. Try to keep up. And just like that they disappeared into the jungle together. Dennis kept his face steady, following Val's lead. He tightened his grip on a jagged piece of metal he pried from the wreckage, his only weapon for now. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. How far are we going? He asked, his voice low. Vala didn't turn. Until we find shelter. Dennis exhaled sharply. And if there isn't any, she smirked. Then I'll dig you a grave. Charming. A deep guttural snarl echoed from somewhere behind them. Both of them froze. The sound was different this time. Closer, hungrier. Dennis turned his head slightly, scanning the dense foliage. What the hell is that? Vala didn't answer. Instead she moved fast. 1 second she was at his side, the next she was pressing him hard against the thick trunk of a tree, her breath warm against his neck. Dennis barely had time to process what was happening before her lips brushed his ear. Don't move. Every muscle in his body went rigid. It slithered between the vines, its shadow shifting against the thick vegetation. Yellow unblinking eyes pierced through the darkness, scanning, searching. Vala was pressed against him, her body shielding his, but he could feel the tension coiling in her muscles. She was waiting for an opening, a chance to strike. The creature moved closer this time, then closer. Then a distant howl split the air. The beast hesitated. It let out a sharp guttural sound before retreating, its heavy steps fading into the jungle. Only then did Vala exhale. She pulled back just enough to meet his gaze. You breathe too loud. Dennis smirked, despite the adrenaline still buzzing through his veins. You were practically on top of me. Her dark eyes narrowed, but she didn't argue. Instead she turned sharply and kept walking. Dennis followed, gripping his makeshift blade a little tighter. They walked for hours, stopping only to drink from the swollen roots of jungle trees or to check their surroundings. Neither of them spoke much. It wasn't trust, it was survival. And then finally they found it, an old human outpost, abandoned and half swallowed by the jungle. The structure was small, barely standing, its metal walls rusted and overgrown with thick vines, but it was shelter. Val approached first, pushing open the battered door. It creaked under the weight of time, revealing a single room interior filled with broken equipment, scattered supplies, and a long-forgotten cot. Dennis stepped inside behind her, eyeing the place. Not exactly 5-star. Vala gave him a look. It's not for comfort, it's for survival. Dennis dropped his piece of metal on a crate and rolled his sore shoulder. Guess that means we're staying. Vala kicked a metal case near the wall, testing its weight. For now they had made it this far alive. But that didn't mean they weren't still enemies. Dennis sat on the edge of the cot, stretching out his legs. So what's the plan, Commander? Vala leaned against the door frame, arms crossed. We rest. We Gather what we can, then we figure out how to get off this planet. Dennis arched a brow. Her eyes darkened. Don't mistake this for an alliance. Human, you die out there, you slow me down, that's the only reason you're still breathing. Dennis smiled. Keep telling yourself that. Instead of answering him, she looked around. Dennis sat on the cot, testing the limits of his injuries. Nothing broken, just bruises, cuts and exhaustion grinding through his bones. Across the room, Vala was kneeling beside an old supply crate, digging through its contents with sharp efficiency. She had stripped off her tattered jacket, leaving her in a form-fitting undershirt, the deep green of her skin catching in the dim light. Dennis leaned back against the metal wall. Find anything useful? She didn't answer at first, just pulled out a dented canteen, shook it, then tossed it aside. Not much, some old ration packs. Half a medkit and a few tools. Dennis let out a low chuckle. Half a medkit, great. Hope it's the half with the painkillers. Vala gave him a dry look, then reached into the crate again, pulling out a small metallic container. She popped the latch, revealing a handful of sealed packets inside, bandages coagulant enough to keep you from bleeding out, at least. Dennis arched a brow. That an offer? She stood stepping closer, her dark eyes assessing him, measuring him. You're wounded, she said flatly. Dennis smirked. You noticed? Vala exhaled sharply, like she was already regretting this, but then she knelt in front of him, pulling out a disinfectant wipe. Take off your shirt. There was something about the way she said it, not a request, a command. He peeled off the torn remnants of his shirt, hissing slightly as the fabric stuck to the deeper cuts along his ribs. Vala's gaze flicked over his body, lingering on the bruises, the gashes, the scars from battles past. She didn't comment, didn't flinch, just reached out and pressed the disinfectant to his side. Dennis sucked in a breath. Damn, that stings. Don't be weak, she murmured. Focused on her work, Dennis let out a low laugh. I was shot down in a burning transport and dragged my ass through a jungle filled with things that want to eat me. I think I'm past weak. Valira didn't respond, but her touch lingered just a second too long before she moved to the next wound. Her fingers were steady, precise, not gentle but not cruel either. Dennis watched her, the way her brows knit slightly as she concentrated, the way her lips pressed together in silent thought. It wasn't just battlefield efficiency, it was familiarity. You done this before, he murmured. Valra didn't look at him. Of course I have. No, I mean. Dennis exhaled, adjusting his position as she pressed a bandage to his ribs. You've treated more wounds than you've taken. You weren't just a commander, were you? Her fingers hesitated for half a second, then she pulled back. Dennis tilted his head. What? Vala wiped her hands on a spare cloth, her expression unreadable. Nothing. Dennis.
Up she stood on her own this time. What now? She asked. Scott strapped the last holster to his leg. Now we stop being prey, then we fight. Scott grinned. Side by side or back to back, she said, pulling her hair tight behind her head. Either way, no more running. The mine held its breath. Scott could feel it, like the air itself had gone dense around them. Earth pressed in from all sides, packed tight from decades of silence and decay. Base's skin still glowed faintly in streaks across her arms and down her spine, but the pulsing was slower now, controlled, no longer wild with instability. She stood on her own legs, braced, breath steady, but her eyes said it plain. She was balancing on the edge of something bigger than heat. She stepped forward first, her hands brushed his bare chest again, softer this time, not frantic, not sparking with survival. Just searching. You're different, she murmured. Because I'm human, he asked. No. Her eyes didn't waver. Because you didn't run. Scott's jaw ticked. Running was never the problem. Staying is. Then stay, she said. She didn't wait for an answer. She pressed into him, mouth to mouth this time, with something deeper than fire, and it changed everything. Her fingers slid around his neck, his hands moved across her back down to her hips, steady and slow, like he was learning her shape by instinct. And maybe he was. Tell me what you need, he said, breath rough against her throat. She bit back, a sound barely audible. I don't know how to want like this. Scott pulled back just enough to look her in the eye. Then we figure it out together. Base's whole body shuddered, and for a second her hands tightened at his sides. Her breath hitched. She started to speak, but instead she moved one push forward, and Scott was against the rock wall, cool stone digging into his back, but her heat made it irrelevant. She straddled him there, thighs sliding up against his hip, her body pressed full length into his, her voice close to his ear. I've trained in pain, I've trained in control, but this is different. Scott finished her Head dropped to his shoulder, cheek against his neck. It's not meant to feel like this. Then let it, he said. She lifted her head. You're too deep, I can't take it anymore. The words broke from her like a confession, but she didn't stop. She grabbed him tighter, nails pressing into his back, her breath ragged against his skin. Scott didn't hesitate. He held her through it, grounded her, his hand sliding up into her hair, other arm braced across her lower back. I've got you, he said again, voice lower now, all the way. Her body jerked once against him. Not in panic, a wave of heat radiated out from her chest like her core was discharging through contact, and then she stilled. Her body sagged against his, not in collapse, but in surrender. The light dimmed and Besa exhaled for the first time, in what felt like hours. When she finally pulled back, her hands were still shaking slightly. She looked down at them, then up at him. I didn't think I'd survive it, she said. Scott touched her face, thumb brushing the damp line of her jaw. You didn't just survive it, you took it back. Bera blinked hard. She wasn't crying, she wouldn't let herself, but her voice cracked just once when she spoke again. First time I ever chose someone and wasn't punished for it. Scott leaned in, forehead against hers. You're not a tool, you're not a weapon. You sure about that? She asked, voice unsteady. Yeah, he whispered. I've seen the difference. They stayed locked there for a long moment, breathing together, letting the mine wall cool their skin while their bodies unwound from the heat. Then Bera spoke again. They are going to hit us soon. They've waited long enough. Scott nodded. Already moving, he grabbed his shirt, pulled it over his head, and slung the rifle strap back around his shoulder. We don't give them a clean entry, he said. Tripwire, said I rigged the ridge trail with pressure caps. Bera grabbed her half disassembled gear from the floor, and I planted 2 pulse flares by the northeast tree, and if they send drones, I'll fry them. Scott looked at her. You good to fight? She cocked her head at him, something hot and wicked behind her smirk. I just survived mating surge collapse with a human who doesn't even flinch, she said. I'm better than good. Scott returned the smirk. Then let's make them regret tracking you this far. They climbed out of the tunnel together. The wind had returned, but the forest still felt too quiet, like the next move wasn't up to them anymore. Besa stepped ahead of him, her hand out toward the wind, her body already shifting back into something sleek, fast prepared. They are here, she said. Scott chambered around. Then let them come. The first shot didn't make a sound. It felt like a ripple, air folding in on itself somewhere behind the tree, and Scott didn't flinch. He and Bera stood motionless in the clearing outside the mine. The light had changed yellow into gold, into red. The sun was rising, but the forest was still stuck in shadow, like it refused to witness what was about to happen. Bera's hand moved once and pulled a disc-shaped object from her belt. It blinked once in her palm. She tossed it toward the trees. The pulse grenade detonated with a whisper, not an explosion, just light, and then silence. Broke footfalls, 3 of them, one heavy armored, the other 2 fast. Precision movement. Branches cracked, but no voices followed. These weren't soldiers, these were executioners. Scott shifted his stance, one knee bent, shoulder rotated toward cover 3. He asked, no, Bass IA, said her voice tighter. That's just the first sweep. She turned slightly blue, eyes scanning the canopy. They are hunting, not striking. They are waiting for one of us to move. Scott reached down and snapped the pin from a tripwire buried beneath the moss. Let's give them what they want. Bera didn't smile, but she didn't argue either. A sharp whistle echoed, non-human, coded as Athenian field signal. They were close. She turned to Scott, fast, low voice. They'll go for you first. You're the variable, I'm the prize. Stay out of the open. Scott cocked his head. You're giving orders now. I know how they think, she said. I was one of them. Scott didn't like it, but he respected it. Then the trees moved a shimmer. Then 3 bodies decloaked mid-motion, one leaping straight from the upper canopy, blade out, serrated edge designed for internal trauma. Besa moved first. She caught the blade mid-swing, twisting her entire body. With it sliced her shoulder, but not deep. She turned, the impact spun, and drove her knee into the attacker's chest. The exosuit buckled. With a hiss, the hunter slammed into the dirt. The second one went for Scott. Wrong move. He fired once, center mass. The impact lit the target's back with a plasma flash, enough to knock the body sideways into a trunk. It didn't kill, but It stunned. He moved in fast boot, crushing the enemy's forearm. Before the blade could lift again, he grabbed the rifle, twisted fire point blank into the helmet. Baser crouched low beside the first MC, dragging a second pulse grenade from her belt. Scott's voice cut through. Third. She glanced left, still watching. It's command heavy. No, she said, smarter. Before he could respond, a thump rocked the dirt under their feet, not from movement, from descent. The fourth hunter wasn't in the trees, he was above them.
Metal frame, he grunted as the impact vibrated through his bones, but he couldn't stop the low chuckle that rumbled in his chest. You really don't like being handled, do you? He murmured. Valra smirked against his lips. You don't seem to mind. She pushed against him again, her body flush against his, her breath hot against his skin. Then a noise outside. Vala pulled back slightly, her dark eyes flicking toward the jungle. Dennis followed her gaze, muscles tensed. We weren't the only ones listening, she murmured. Dennis exhaled sharply, letting his hands drop from her waist. He turned his focus outward, scanning the tree-lined silence. Then a shadow moved. Dennis reached for his stolen rifle. Valero was already one step ahead, dropping low, weapon raised. A green-skinned figure stepped out from the dense foliage. Not an animal, a soldier. Val's jaw tightened. Dennis didn't lower his weapon. Friend of yours? The Sotter's dark gaze flicked between them. Val Veeler, he said, voice low, edged with something cold. I never thought I'd find you here. Dennis felt the shift in Val's body before she even spoke. Recognition. She knew this man and she wasn't happy about it. Val's grip tightened on her rifle. Riken. Dennis exhaled. Fantastic. Someone want to explain what the hell is going on? Riken's lips curled slightly. You're the human, aren't you? Dennis smirked. Good. EY. Riken didn't react. His attention flicked back to Vala. I was told you were dead. Val's expression didn't change. You should have looked harder. Riken took a slow step forward. Dennis tensed, ready to fire. Then Riken smirked. You always did know how to pick your battles. Veeler, his gaze flicked toward Dennis. Unreadable. I'm here to offer you a choice. Vala tilted her head. I don't take offers. Riken chuckled. Then take it as a warning. Dennis arched a brow. Great. I love those. Riken ignored him. They're coming for you. Veeler, more than just scouts, more than just hunters. Val's expression didn't change. Riken exhaled, shaking his head slightly. I could kill you now, collect the bounty myself, but I'm not here for that. Dennis tightened his grip on the rifle. Then what the hell are you here for? Riken met his gaze. Then he tossed something. It landed in the dirt at Val's feet with a dull thud. A tracking device. Dennis exhaled sharply. Vala stilled. You're already marked. Riken said, voice calm. You can run, you can fight, but they will come for you. He took a step back. Choose wisely, Veeler. And then he vanished into the jungle silence. Dennis exhaled slowly. Well, he looked at Vala. That's a problem. Vala crushed the tracking device vise under her boot. She turned back toward the jungle. We need to move. Dennis sat up straighter. Already? She nodded. Riken wasn't lying. If they know where we are, it's only a matter of time before more of them show up. Dennis ran a hand through his short hair, exhaling. All right, any brilliant plans? Vala was silent for a long moment. Then we take their ship. Dennis blinked, then laughed. I knew it. Vala glanced at him. Knew what? That your first instinct would be something reckless. She smirked. I don't waste time. Dennis stood, stretching out his stiff muscles. Okay, stealing a ship, how do we make that happen? Vala pulled a small circular device from her belt, a neural disruptor. Dennis's smirk widened. You just happen to have one of those lying around? She gave him a dry look. I plan ahead. Dennis exhaled, rolling his shoulders. All right, Commander, what's the move? Vala turned toward him, fully, her dark eyes sharp. Riken said they we're sending more. That means a landing team. Soldiers, a transport. Dennis nodded. So we let them land, hit them fast, and take their ride. Val's gaze flickered with approval. Now you're catching on. Dennis smirked. I learn from the best. Valera exhaled. We wait until they make contact, then strike before they can get reinforcements. We only have one shot at this. Dennis tightened his grip on his rifle. Then let's not miss. They moved fast, silent. Dennis crouched low in the undergrowth, rifle steady, heart hammering in his chest. Vala was beside him, watching as the alien transport ship descended through the treetops. The moment stretched, then the ramp lowered. 3 soldiers stepped out, weapons raised. Vala shifted beside him. Wait for it. Another soldier stepped out. The pilot. Valo whispered. Now chaos erupted. Dennis fired the first shot, taking down the lead soldier before he could react. Valo was already moving, a blur of lethal precision as she closed the distance, slamming her knee into the second Sodders before finishing him with a swift strike to the throat. The pilot Spun reaching for his sidearm. Dennis shot first. The pilot hit the ground. Unmoving, the third soldier turned to run, but Valera was faster. She threw the neural disruptor a pulse of energy. Cracked through the air. The soldier collapsed mid-step. His nervous system temporarily scrambled. Vala exhaled. Transport secured. Dennis grinned. You make that look easy. Vala smiled. You slow me down, human. Dennis chuckled, stepping over the fallen bodies as he approached the transport. The ship was military grade, built for speed, exactly what they needed. Val moved toward the cockpit. Scanning the controls. Can you fly this? Dennis slid into the pilot's seat, fingers dancing over the unfamiliar interface. Different tech, same principles. He smiled. Oh yeah. The engines rumbled to life beneath them. Vala strapped into the co-pilot's seat. Then get us off this rock. Dennis tightened his grip on the controls. Hold on. The ship shot into the sky. Then, the alarms blared. Dennis cursed. We've got company. Vala's eyes snapped to the scanner. 3 enemy fighters inbound. Dennis exhaled sharply. Of course we do. The cow crackled to life. A cold familiar voice. Ryken, did you really think it would be that easy? Velar. Val's jaw tightened. Dennis smirked. Man, you guys really hold a grudge. Ryken chuckled. Enjoy your head start. It won't last. The fighters closed in. Dennis gripped the controls. Guess we're doing this the hard way. Val's smile was sharp. Good, I hate easy. Dennis rolled the ship banking hard as the first plasma shots narrowly missed the hull. Vala was already arming the ship's defenses. Eyes locked on the targeting systems. Keep them in range, she murmured. Dennis gritted his teeth, working on it. The fighters closed and the jungle planet shrank below them, swallowed by the darkness of space. Dennis smirked. They were free now. They just had to stay that way. The cockpit was a blur of red warning lights, the ship's console flashing with incoming missile alerts and proximity warnings. Dennis gritted his teeth, gripping the controls tighter. The stolen transport wasn't built for evasive maneuvers, but he had no choice. 3 enemy fighters, fast armed, determined. They weren't here to the ship, they were here to eliminate it. Dennis rolled hard to the right, sending the transport into a sharp dive. The first volley of plasma fire narrowly missed the hull, cutting through the black void of space. In the co-pilot's seat, Vala was already moving, fingers flying over the weapons console, bringing rear cannons online. She muttered. Dennis smirked despite the chaos. About time you did some work. Vunk. Dark eyes flicked toward him. Fly straight for 2 seconds and I'll show you what work looks like. Dennis let out a short laugh. No promises. The next shot rocked the ship, sending a shock wave through the cabin. Sparks exploded from the overhead panel. The ship Spiro tumbling through space. Dennis gritted his teeth. Think. They were losing altitude. The gravity of a nearby planet was pulling them in. Dennis exhaled sharply. Vala. She looked at him, reading his expression. Immediately she knew. Dennis yanked the controls, sending the ship into a steep descent toward the planet. Reagan's voice snapped through the calories. What the hell are you doing? Dennis grinned. Taking you with me. The stolen transport dove toward the planet at full speed. Ryken's fighter followed. The atmosphere burned. The heat roared through the ship, metal creaking, alarms wailing. Ryken stayed on them, locked and refusing to break off. Dennis waited. Vala held her breath. Then at the last second Dennis pulled up. The ship just barely avoided impact. Ryken not so lucky. His fighter slammed into the ground. A massive fireball erupted across the landscape below. Dennis exhaled sharply, muscles shaking from the effort. That's 3. Vala glanced at him, breathing heavily. You're insane. Dennis
smirked. And yet here you are. She rolled her eyes. Shut up and land before we end up like him. Dennis chuckled, gripping the controls. Yes, the stolen transport touched down hard, kicking up dust and debris. Dennis barely managed to stabilize it. The damaged thrusters sputtering when the ship finally stopped. Silence filled the cabin. Dennis exhaled, running a hand through his short hair. Well, that sucked. Vala unstrapped herself from the co-pilot seat. You pulled us out. Dennis smirked, starting to like me, aren't you? She ignored that, standing and checking the ship systems. We need to move before more of them show up. Dennis leaned back. You sure they will? Funk. Dark eyes locked onto his. They always do. Dennis exhaled. Great, another warm welcome. He stood stretching, feeling every bruise, every cut. Vala grabbed a small pack from the emergency storage. We cover, we regroup, and we figure out our next move. Dennis chuckled. I think I like you. She arched a brow. Don't get used to it. Dennis slung his rifle over his shoulder. Oh, I already am. Vala rolled her eyes and stepped off the ship. Dennis followed. Vala turned, looked at the ship, and with urgency she went to the part of The ship where the emergency call equipment was and dismantled it. Dennis leaned against the twisted trunk of a dead tree, arms crossed, watching Valra. As she studied the small distressed beacon, she had pried from the ship's wreckage a single press of a button. That's all it would take. A rescue, reinforcements, maybe even an end to all of this, but whose forces would come? Hers, his, someone worse. Dennis exhaled. You should turn me in. Vala didn't look up. I should. If she called her people, he'd be a prisoner, or dead. If she called his, she'd be the one in chains. Neither option left them standing side by side, and yet she didn't activate the beacon. Instead, Vala stepped forward, closing the space between them. She pressed a hand against his chest. Fingers sped over the dust-covered fabric of his torn shirt. Her palm was warm, warmer than it should have been. You should run before I changed my mind. Her voice was low, unreadable. Dennis smirked, but his grip tightened around her wrist. You don't want me to run? Val's breath hitched, so subtle, so quick, he almost missed it. Her lips parted slightly. Damn him. Dennis tilted his head. I think you want me right here. Val's dark eyes flashed with anger, with something else. Something unspoken, I think, she murmured, stepping even closer. I want to put a knife in your ribs. Dennis chuckled. Yeah. His fingers slid up her arm, slow and deliberate. Then why haven't you? Vala froze, just for a second, a single sharp beat of hesitation. Dennis felt it, knew it. Then she moved fast, her hand shot up, fingers curling around his throat, not choking, just pressing. A challenge, a test. Dennis didn't move, didn't push her off, didn't break eye contact. Val's grip was strong, but her breath was uneven. Her thumb brushed his pulse and lingered. Dennis smirked, not going to finish the job. Vala exhaled sharply, releasing him too quickly, like she had to force herself to let go. She stepped back. The distance between them felt wrong. Dennis arched a brow. That's what I thought. Vala didn't answer. Instead, she turned away, back toward the beacon. Dennis watched her, something twisting deep in his chest. She could have pressed the button, could have called for an end to whatever this was between them, but she didn't. She hesitated, and for a woman like her, hesitation meant everything. Dennis pushed off the tree, stepping beside her. What's the real plan, Vala? She exhaled, shoulders tense. We don't have many options. The ship's dead. We are stuck here until someone finds us. Dennis glanced at the beacon. You going to push it? Vala hesitated. Dennis smirked. Thought so. She shot him a glare, but there was something else in her expression, something like uncertainty. Dennis stepped closer, his voice lower, now quieter. What are you afraid of? Vala scoffed. Nothing. Dennis tilted his head. Then why are your hands shaking? Vala still. Then slowly she looked down, her fingers steady in battle, flawless, with a blade, were trembling, not much, just enough to betray her. Dennis exhaled, watching her, the mighty commander, Vala, warrior of the Galari. Undefeated in war, shaken not by fear, not by the threat of death, by him. Vala clenched her jaw, forcing the tremor away. She stepped forward, pressing a hand to the beacon's activation panel. Dennis's pulse jumped. She was doing it, calling for rescue, choosing a side. Then she ripped it out. The beacon crunched under her grip, wires sparking as she crushed it in her fist. Dennis blinked. Val let the broken device drop to the ground, exhaling slowly. No one's coming, she murmured. Dennis smirked. So you're keeping me then? Vala shot him a look, but this time there was no fire behind it, no threat, no denial. She turned away, heading back toward the cliffs. Dennis followed. The cave was deep, hidden within the jagged cliffs. It wasn't a perfect shelter, but it was the best they had. Dennis leaned against the wall, watching as Vala scanned the interior of their newfound refuge. Her movements were slower now. She was tired too. She just wouldn't admit it. Dennis smirked, shifting his stance. Not bad, Commander. Could use a bed though. Vala shot him a look. You'll live. Dennis chuckled. That a promise. She ignored him, dropping her pack onto the ground, but she wasn't ignoring him. Not really. Dennis exhaled, glancing at his arm. The cut along his bicep had stopped bleeding, but it was deep, messy. Val's gaze flicked to it then. Without a word, she stepped closer. Dennis arched a brow. Something on your mind? She studied him for a long moment before speaking. Take off your shirt. Dennis grinned. If you wanted me naked, Val, you could have just asked. She didn't rise to the bait, didn't even blink. Turn around, she ordered. Dennis hesitated, but